That's right, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for everybody's favorite game. Necro plays a video game and it makes him unreasonably angry.
And wonder of wonders, it's another Warhammer property, so that means that you get me au naturel and blown the fuck out by my light. And also, please, pardon the mess.
Yep, that's me. You're probably wondering how I ended up in this situation.
Boltgun is mediocre. I won't say that what I've played is a bad game, but it's certainly doing nothing all that great. But what I will say is that all throughout the first chapter, I have encountered some absolutely unforgivable jank that once it reared its ugly head, I couldn't stop seeing play out in real time, and I'd like to share those problems with you so that maybe someone will see this someday and think, gee, maybe I shouldn't do shit like that and actually give a fuck about the core mechanical functions of my game. And I want to stress that I do not go looking for these problems. They just show up, and then I can't stop fucking seeing them everywhere. So what the fuck was that, and why should anybody care? Short answer, your mother is a skank. Long answer is, I'm holding W, pressing space, and the game is shunting me off a cliff for laughs because God has abandoned humanity and the devil now walks the earth. But what's causing it to do that motherfucking reliably to the point that every time I tried to jump over the bridge and multiple rubble piles and obstacles, that shit would happen? Well, let's talk about bonking. Add an extra I in there and we can talk about what me and your mom are doing later, but for now, we'll leave I out of it. Bonking is a pretty common phrase most often used in Mario speedrunning, but applies to just about every game in which you control an object in a space. Said bonking occurs when you press the A button and Mario hurls himself at the ceiling at terminal velocity, giving himself multiple brain contusions, and dies slowly and painfully in full sight of God and everybody. Mechanically, what this means is that when the game detects upward movement and head hitting block, all of the Y velocity is set to 0, horizontal velocity is decreased drastically, and Mario immediately begins falling as if he walked his happy little drug-addled ass off a cliff like a handler with no sense of self-preservation. This is pretty much standard for platformers and is generally how collision works. To prevent Mario from jumping or running through objects, when the game detects a frame in which Mario would be inside an object, cut the velocity, reverse his direction. Simple, easy, and no, I'm not talking about your mother. In the timeless classics of Sonic Adventure, when Sargnarg would do himself a bonk, things go differently. Instead of nullifying vertical velocity, it keeps it, which creates a situation where Sank will just hover as if he's stuck to the ceiling temporarily. Pretty cool, much rad, I promise. So what happens in Boltgun when you decide that the cranial damage TikTok challenge is what you want to do today? Well, let's take a look. If the game detects that you slam your skull into a ledge, wall, ceiling, or any other object that your dome can be slammed into, the game doesn't cancel vertical velocity, nor does it keep it, but simply stick you to the ledge. Instead, Auroch Digital has decided that when the game detects a bonk, instead of canceling vertical velocity, it will instead shift all of it to horizontal velocity in the opposite direction of the detected collision. This means, because it's a slight left-facing ledge, it will launch me to the right. But Necro, I hear you calling as you crawl out from under your pile of big titty goth GFs. How does this in any way apply to what is happening on that bridge?
Oh, well.
Hammer a pin into all that for a moment because now I get to talk about hitboxes. You may be most familiar with hitboxes from such things as fighting games and ARPGs, but they apply to everything that isn't a trash novella masquerading as a game. Disclaimer: TheNecroswanson is not a game developer and knows dick all about it. The methodology which he will now explain it is going to be overly simplistic to the point that it may be considered entirely inaccurate to how games function, but has done so to make the issues clear to what they do. Go fuck yourself. In first-person shooters, hitboxes have been a big thing not just for functionality, but also for immersion. Old school shooters, and even many new ones, don't have a player's body visibly occupying a space. The player is an invisible camera inside of an invisible hitbox with sprites overlaid. How more modern shooters handle this is a little bit different, and it isn't necessary to explain here. There are many ways to handle this as far as handling height, jumping, and falling. Common way is to lock the camera height a set number of units above the floor, and when floor being lower is detected, falling happens. Jumping is kind of handled through button being pressed, vertical velocity happens, yada yada yada. This stuff isn't really new, but what prevents the player from falling through the ground? In some cases, it's just a factor of height, but in many others, it's a factor of the invisible hitbox. The outer perimeter will be coded to look for collision. If vertical collision, do not let continue horizontally. If horizontal collision, do not allow to continue vertically. Essentially, it's the basic coding that keeps you from walking through walls or falling through the floor. Some games will give all these collisions to the entire body, blocks, others just parts where it is necessary. And this is where it's going to get... makes Necro annoyed. The head contains all the coding and collision modifiers for a bonk. Object detected in a jump, launch horizontally, but it's also applied all the way fucking down here at our invisible ultramarine feet. Now let's watch that jump again. So what's happening here is that despite only holding one direction, forward, and looking forward, I hit jump, the bonk collision detects my feet touched a slight edge, i.e. the rubble, and decides I'm trying to jump through geometry, even though I'm obviously fucking not, and flings my ass off a cliff for having the audacity to engage the game on its terms. I cannot trust the game to reliably handle an action as simple as jumping over a gap they ask me to jump over. But that's not the end of it. Let's talk about the dash attack. Hey, guess what? You have a dash attack. I bet you couldn't have figured that out from the context clues given in my previous statement, but it's there. Press button, it goes off. But it's almost useless, it's definitely redundant, and it is most certainly a poorly implemented attack in this game. Physical spatial awareness does not exist. You cannot gauge the fullness of your collision detection even on the highest FOV. Why does this matter? Well, because literally everything stops the dash attack. I can hold shift and sprint infinitely, but if a single pixel grazes the oxygen atoms next to my oversized spalder, the dash stops dead in its tracks. Do you know what also stops the dash dead in its tracks? A slight upward incline. The most minuscule vertical incline stops the dash. Even better, if you perform the dash attack at a group of enemies on a downward incline, you will just go flying over them. But it gets worse, because you have a chain sword. The chain sword practically freezes the game so you can target it and then will zip you straight to an enemy. Now, this has issues when inclines get involved as well because again, developer incompetence, but it has a hilariously impressive utility. It turns the most boring chapter of Astartes into homing missiles. Yes, Roberto Girlyman is a Sonic Adventure stan and taught his children the secret technique of the homing attack. You go straight to your target, even if they are 20 feet above you, and this means the game is launching you at an 80-degree angle. Homing, extra jump, dashing attack that functions with 90% reliability, ignoring declines and nurglings, of course, and you can spam it. There is no cooldown for when you can use the chainsword attack next. But the dash attack is on a fucking cooldown. Have you figured the problem out yet? So you have a button that 9 times out of 10 you press it, does fucking nothing by design, alongside a button that does better, has better utility, actually works, and was a well thought out gameplay mechanic. It's not just redundant, it's poorly thought out, poorly implemented, poorly coded, bloat, and only exists because 8 bajillion functions are needed, even if there are 2 others that already exist and are better. So, 40k in a fucking nutshell, and then there's enemy AI, and it is a doozy. Boomer shooters of the oldest school variety tend to function on 3 states: sleep, seek, slaughter. Sleep refers to when they are programmed to simply sit there until you do something that alerts them. Seek is when this, but they move around looking for something to either infight with or you. Slaughter is when they try to kill you or the thing they are infighting with. These are broadly based on line of sight, sometimes sound, and enemies will first establish a line of sight and then move into the designated range at which they are allowed to begin attempting to harm you, sometimes the other way around depending on the enemy type. The big thing they need, however, is line of sight. Doom being a 30-year-old game allowed you to cheese them to fire into pillars and walls, but they were coded to try and avoid that. But this isn't a 30-year-old game. This released in the year of the darkest timeline, 2023. Enemy awareness is based on a sphere. Once you enter that sphere or wake them up, they will immediately begin the slaughter protocol, and none of it is based on line of sight. Sure, a wall becomes a problem and they will attempt to pathfind to get the best opportunity to fire at you, but that line of sight does not check for rubble or pillars. The end result is that it's common for enemies to mag dump into walls and rubble. It also means the Lord of Change's Archvile attack doesn't require line of sight to enact, and about 50% of the time, even sprinting and jumping will still see you taking damage from it. But it gets weirder. Enemies fire at you, but they will also lead their shots. This means if they detect movement, they will try to fire where you are going to be. This is actually good design, But the problem comes in how it's coded. If stationary, then fire at player. Else, fire at X units ahead of their movement direction. Then you fill your code with so many if, thens, and elses that the spaghetti nightmare results in a game that is barely functional a goddamn decade after development began. So let's combine sphere of awareness, line of sight not being necessary, and leading. What do we get? Well, we get a situation where I'm in this tiny-ass corridor fleeing from a Terminator because you need to circle strafe anti-clockwise or eat Bolt, but I'm in this tiny corridor. So I'm running to the end of said corridor and an enemy on the other side of the map with multiple two-story barriers between us fires at the opening, knowing that is the direction I am going, and line of sight to what I am doing is not necessary. It's just reading my position and inputs like a fighting game from the late 90s and early aughts. And then it gets worse. Because the AI wants to predict where you are and what you are doing, and line of sight isn't necessary, the AI will oftentimes try to fire around a corner. Not at a corner, around a corner. Just... what the fuck? Finally, the art direction is pure donkey dick! Sure, the soundtrack sucks, but I can look past that. It's fucking 40K. Their soundtracks always suck. What I can't look past is having to wait for an enemy to shoot at me to figure out where they are, because in broad fucking daylight, with them directly in front of me, they blend in perfectly with the background. Absolutely no care was given to make sure this didn't happen, and so it happens a hell of a lot. It's bad. It's just bad. By the way, I decided to play this game blind on hard. The game still failed to challenge me in any way. You can defeat the AI just by alternating A and D on Chaos Marines, and they will never be able to hit what's directly the fuck in front of them. And look, I get it, the game isn't just downright awful. Like I said, it's pure mediocrity made by people who didn't really know what they were doing. Look up Arok's recent releases, or any of their releases. I don't think they've ever tried anything like this. But it's a post-Nemeroth Forge World Graia. It's an Ultramarine story, and it's chaos undivided. It is without a doubt the most boring and bland setting you could possibly go with outside of Necromunda, with the most boring chapter in the franchise, with the most boring combat and level design, with the least challenging gameplay I've ever encountered when it's not being pure jank. Its biggest crime is boring mediocrity. Its second is incompetence. If you're enjoying it, I'm glad, and that's not sarcasm. I'm glad you've got something you are having fun with. But I've played Darktide and Blood Bowl 3 and Hired Gun. I just don't have the time anymore to devote to minimum viable products, cash-ins, and degenerate displays of core mechanical incompetence. Once it rears its ugly head, I can't stop noticing it, and it permeates throughout. There are no reasons other than blatant incompetence or outright malice that would cause these jump issues, and the AI is just poorly executed. There's a bajillion boomer shooters out there made by people who actually give a fuck about QA. Thanks, camera. Go fuck yourself. This is a brand new fucking camera. Playtesting, and make sure it functions in the way that doesn't dick the player around. Thank you, camera. You're a brand new camera, which means it's my fucking motherboard and my fucking CPU. Great. Here goes $400 more fucking dollars. Fuck you, you piece of shit. Are you having fun with the game? Good. I want games to be things people enjoy, even if the shit's so blatantly fucked that I can't. So, keep at it. But I've got better things to do than waste any more of my time and money on whatever half-ass bullshit that comes out of the 40K property. I'm not coming within an astronomical unit of Space Marine 2, and it's shit like this that just breaks the camel's back for me. Have fun. I'm moving on to cool shit by people who actually give a fuck.